Hello and welcome to Business 360. I'm Arundhati Ramnan and these are the top headlines that we're tracking for you. The Reserve Bank leaves key rates unchanged in a unanimous decision by the Monetary Policy Committee, maintains the neutral stance, lowers the inflation forecast for this fiscal by 60 basis points to 3.1%. Governor Sanjay Malhotra says the RBI does not foresee US tariffs impacting the Indian economy in a major way unless retaliatory tariffs are imposed. Central Bank remains hopeful about an amicable solution. US President Trump threatens to hit India with additional tariffs buying Russian oil within 24 hours. India calls it unjustified and unreasonable. When asked about the continuing US imports from Russia, Trump says he doesn't know about it and will check and get back. Sensex and Nifty end with minor losses as Trump's tariff threat weighs on sentiment. RBI status quo policy fails to lift sentiment. Mid-caps and small-caps suffer sharper cuts. SEBI Chairman Tuhin Kanta Pandey says reports that the market regulator was considering measures to curb the F&O frenzy speculation, adds that though reforms are needed, its nature and treatment would be discussed with the stakeholders. Bajaj Auto meets muted expectations in the first quarter. Recent price hikes boost realizations. Management says that they are gaining market share in the mid-level bike segment as the countdown to the festive season begins.
3, 2, 1.
India's largest depository, NSDL, sees a healthy debut on BSE, ends the day with gains of 17% after listing at a 10% premium, captures a market cap of close to 20,000 crore rupees. At least 5 people are dead and over 100 fear trapped under debris from flash floods triggered a landslide in Uttarakhand. Several houses in Uttarkashi's Dharali buried by the landslide. Authorities say more than 400 people rescued so far. More than 20 people killed in Israeli attacks on Gaza since dawn. A United Nations clinic sheltering the displaced was also targeted. Food and water remains in short supply as many Gazans continue to starve. The top story this evening, the Reserve Bank of India has left its repo rate unchanged at 5.5% in a unanimous decision by the Monetary Policy Committee. The central bank also maintained its neutral stance. The pause comes after 3 consecutive rate cuts. The RBI lowered the inflation forecast for this fiscal by 60 basis points to 3.1%. This is largely because of a higher base last year and lower vegetable prices. The central bank has projected that inflation could reach 4.9% in FY27. RBI Governor Sanjay Malhotra ruled out any further liquidity-boosting measures, saying that the current position is stable. The governor also said that the RBI does not foresee US tariffs impacting the Indian economy in a major way unless retaliatory tariffs are imposed. He added that he is hopeful of an amicable solution between the two nations.
The MPC noted that while headline inflation is much lower than projected earlier, it is mainly due to volatile food prices, especially in vegetables. Core inflation, on the other hand, has remained steady around the 4% mark as anticipated. Inflation is projected to go up from the last quarter of this financial year.
As of now, we don't see a major impact of this unless, we have retaliatory tariffs and so on and so forth, which I really do not foresee.
Geopolitical uncertainties have somewhat abated, even though global trade challenges continue to linger. Over the medium term also, the Indian economy holds bright prospects in the changing world order.
The fact that there was no cut wasn't a big disappointment. That was on expected lines. But the Reserve Bank did seem to shut the door on any further rate cut because of this, forecast of a 4.9% inflation in April, June next year, that is 2026. So if you're looking at the 1 year forward, there isn't much of a chance because it is well over 4%, which is their mandate. The growth-related reason to cut a rate also was not there because they retained the GDP growth forecast at 6.5%. I even prodded him to ask whether, this includes the tariff impact or whether, there is a chance it will be lowered. And he actually said that, you remember, we lowered it from 6.7 to 6.5 in the previous policy, and that absorbed or discounted some of the negative global impulses. So that kind of juiced out any hopes of a further rate cut. And you could see that in the 10-year yield going up. But my own sense is that, there is a crack in the door. At least 3 times, the governor said that policy will be data dependent. We will move from meeting to meeting. We will decide policy by policy. I don't want to preempt what the MPC will do in the future. All of which indicated that, just imagine, say, if not in this September 30th policy, in the December policy, even if you have very strong first quarter, second quarter GDP numbers, the incoming data, PMI numbers, IIP numbers could get weaker, export numbers could get weaker because of the global weakness. The Fed could have cut a couple of times by the December policy, and the 1 year forward from December 2025 onwards may not be 5%. It could be much weaker, primarily because of the base effect also. And therefore, I won't really shut the door on rate cuts in either December or February or April. I wouldn't say this is the end of the rate cutting cycle, but the market looks at its nose and at the near term or the next policy, there it doesn't look like there is a chance.
And staying with the Reserve Bank, RBI Governor Malhotra has said that the Jan Dhan scheme has completed a decade and many accounts are due for a re-verification of the Know Your Customer rules. Banks have been organizing camps and they will ramp it up to Panchayat level from the 1st of July to the 30th of September. So far, over 1 lakh camps have been conducted and KYC for over 14.22 lakh bank accounts has been verified again. The other big story this evening, US President Donald Trump has threatened to hit India with additional tariffs for buying oil from Russia. Speaking to CNBC yesterday, President Trump said, and I quote, "I think I am going to raise India's tariffs substantially in the next 24 hours, end of quote. The US has already imposed a 25% tariff on imports from India, which is scheduled to take effect tomorrow. He has also vowed to impose additional penalties on India without divulging details. Responding to the US President's threats, the Ministry of External Affairs said the targeting of India is unjustified and unreasonable. The ministry has promised to take all necessary measures to safeguard national interests and economic security. India said it began importing from Russia because traditional supplies were diverted to Europe after the Ukraine war. In fact, India went on to say that the US actively encouraged imports of Russian oil by India as it strengthened global energy market stability. Here is President Trump speaking to CNBC on the possibility of imposing higher tariffs on India.
With India, what people don't like to say about India, they're the highest tariff nation. They have the highest tariff of anybody. We do very, very little business with India because their tariffs are so high. So India has not been a good trading partner because they do a lot of business with us, but we don't do business with them. So we settled on 25%, but I think I'm going to raise that very substantially over the next 24 hours because they're buying Russian oil, they're fueling the war machine. And if they're going to do that, then I'm not going to be happy. But India went from the highest tariffs ever. They will give us 0 tariffs. And they're going to let us go in. But that's not good enough because of what they're doing with oil.
India has called out both the US and European Union for continuing to trade with Russia. In a statement by the External Affairs Ministry, India said US has been importing uranium hexafluoride for its nuclear industry and palladium for its EV industry, along with fertilizers from Russia. President Trump was asked about this today. He responded saying he does not know and will check and get back.
India says that the US imports Russian uranium, chemicals, fertilizers, while criticizing their energy imports. Your response to that, sir?
I don't know anything about it. I'd have to check, but we'll get back to you on that. Yeah, please.
Parikshit Luthra is here with more on India's defense against claims made by President Trump and US officials. Parikshit?
As Donald Trump threatens India with action due to high purchases of Russian oil, several economies, including the European Union, have not been able to decouple from Russia completely. The EU, for one, has paid Russia $105.6 billion for gas imports since the start of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Take note of this now. EU payments for Russian imports were approximately 75% of the 2024 Russian military budget. Europe's LNG imports from Russia are up more than 67% since Q1 of 2021, while EU imports of Russian gas are down 70% in Q1 of 2025 versus Q1 of 2021. But this is not due to sanctions, but because of payment issues and infrastructure damage, according to several experts and reports. Europe is clearly struggling to decouple from Russian gas due to long-term contracts running till 2040 and failure to attain sufficient non-Russia gas supply. If you look at overall trade, EU has reduced trade with Russia, but as of 2024, the two-way trade was approximately $78 billion, less than $68.7 billion worth of trade between India and Russia. EU imports in 2024 were $41.5 billion and were dominated by fuel and mining products. EU's trade with Russia has fallen sharply this year, but imports were still $10 billion in Q1 of 2025. So who are the biggest buyers of Russian exports since December 2022 till June 2025? Let's start with coal. China, 44% when it comes to Russian coal. India, 19%. Turkey, 11%. South Korea, 9%. Taiwan, 4%. All of these countries are buyers of Russian coal. When you speak about biggest buyers of Russian crude oil, you've got China at 47%, India at 38%, Europe at 6%, Turkey at 6%. When you speak about LNG, EU is the biggest buyer. 51% of Russian LNG imports go to EU, 21% to China, 18% to Japan. Pipeline gas, EU again, 37%, China, 30%, Turkey, 27%. Let's now put the spotlight on fossil fuel exports from Russia. Russia earned roughly 922 billion euros in revenue from fossil fuel exports since February 2022. EU purchased more than 212 billion euros worth of these exports. China is the biggest buyer of Russian fossil fuels, followed by India. More than 10 nations, including EU, Turkey, Brazil, Singapore, Hungary, and South Korea, were also buyers. So while Donald Trump is putting all his attention to India, it's not just India. There are many buyers of Russian products all across the world, and one of US's key allies, the European Union itself, has not been able to decouple from Russia.
All right, Parikshit, many thanks for those details. Now, National Security Advisor Ajit Doval has arrived in Moscow to hold talks on India-Russia ties. His visit comes after US President Trump announced tariffs and a penalty on India over its purchases of Russian oil. This is the NSA's first visit to the country after Operation Sindoor. Doval is likely to discuss defense and security cooperation, the delivery of the remaining S-400 missile systems, and preparations for the upcoming SCO summit. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar will also visit Moscow later this month. Like India, Brazil is also facing steep tariffs from USA. On April 2nd, President Donald Trump had announced just 10% tariffs on Brazilian goods. He later hiked it to 50% after accusing the country of conducting a witch hunt against former President Jair Bolsonaro. However, Brazil managed to get ample exemptions on several key exports, including civil aircraft, orange juice, precious metals, wood pulp, energy, and fertilizers. Experts attribute this to the country's patient diplomacy and lobbying by affected US companies. The tariffs will affect just 50% of its goods, including beef and coffee. Brazil has strong ties with China. Brazil's exports to China have doubled in value over the past decade. China accounts for 28% of Brazil's shipments, while Americans buy just 12% of Brazilian goods. Brazil is also far less vulnerable to trade uncertainties compared to other countries in the region. 36% of its GDP comes from exports and imports. This is less than half the share in Paraguay and Mexico. Also, just 10% of its agribusiness trade is concentrated in USA. In contrast, the US was India's largest trading partner between 2021 and 2025. The US accounts for about 18% of India's total goods exports. Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva turned down US President Donald Trump's offer to call him anytime and said he will call Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Chinese President Xi Jinping. He added that he will resort to all possible measures to defend Brazil's interest. Remember, Trump threatened to impose tariffs on countries supporting the BRICS, an organization that India, Russia, and China are a part of. Onto the day's market action, stocks remained jittery on Dalal Street and ended with minor losses. This after US President Trump's tariff threat and RBI status quo policy failed to lift sentiment. Nifty ended below the 24,600 mark, while Sensex slipped over 160 points. Pharma and IT stocks also remained under pressure. Surbhi Upadhyay joins us now with all of those details. Surbhi, what sectors are likely to be impacted by Trump's tariffs?
Well, the impact of this tariff uncertainty and all of Trump's missives is really showing up on the market. Now, why do I say that? Because for the second consecutive day, India was singled out in the fall, whereas most of the global markets were up and about. Most Asian markets were up between 0.25% to as much as 1%. Europe was trading positive, and US markets have also had a decent last couple of days. India, on the other hand, is trading at the lower end of the recent trading range. We're practically at 2-month lows on the Nifty. And specific sectors are getting hit out quite a bit. I'm talking about, of course, pharma as well as textiles. So look at how the numbers stack up. On Wednesday, the Nifty Pharma with the 2% cut was the worst performing sector on the index. And a lot of pharma stocks, large cap, mid cap, most of them were down pretty much across the board. On textiles, it's really showing up. Again, look at Wednesday's numbers first. So if you look at stocks like Gokuldas, down about 4%, Wellspun was down about 4%, Trident down about 1%. And again, just look at the cuts. I mean, Gokuldas exports in the last 3 trading sessions has lost almost 12%. It's one of the key apparel exporters from India, and US is a huge market for this one company. So the question is, if we've all been saying so far, and this is a well-established fact, that our exports to the US are only 2% of India's GDP, then why is the market so concerned? Here are the key reasons. The second-order effects is what the market is getting quite uncomfortable with right now. So what are these second-order effects? Number one, will there be a direct hit on FPI inflows? In any case, July was a bad month. We had total FPI outflows to almost the extent of 18,000 crores. Will it get worse if the 25% tariff remains and if more penalties come India's way? Nuvama, for instance, is saying that the direct impact is going to show up in immediate stocks. Pharma, auto ancillaries, cables and wires, of course, textiles. But there is a wider indirect play, which we have to bear in mind, and that could show up in the mid-cap space as a whole. The mid-cap market on Wednesday as well was falling more than the Nifty. So an FPI exodus out of India could spell trouble for the broader market as a whole, and then cyclicals, even domestic cyclicals like real estate, NBFCs and industrials. Then the uncertainty on FDI flows. We've been speaking to companies. For instance, Thermax gave us this anecdote that while they're quite positive on their local business, but the inquiries from companies from the textile space, from the chemical space, if they start drying up, which is their fear, it could play out on the capex spends as well. And will MNC FDI will also slow down as people reevaluate India's position in global supply chain. So that's, of course, the big thing. That's something India Ratings, by the way, points out, that this reduced tariff advantage that India has, that could limit the benefits of the whole China plus one move. And last, it's all about the timing. Look at the timing. This tariff hit has not come at a great moment at all. In any case, in terms of flows, markets like China and South Korea have been getting the bulk of flows of the last couple of months. Earnings and valuations here in India are not particularly seen as favorable for the bulls. Earnings growth this year is supposed to be in high single digits at best, and valuations, most say, are still not very, very comfortable or exciting. Hopes now are squarely pinned on a second half consumption domestic recovery.
All right, Surbhi, many thanks for those details. Now, auto major Bajaj Auto's first quarter numbers were in line with muted expectations. Realizations rose more than expected, even as weak motorcycle sales were offset by strong growth in the EV portfolio. Net profit increased 5.4% and revenue also grew to 5.5% on an annualized basis. Margins narrowed to 19.7% from 20% last year. Shares of Bajaj Auto declined in intraday trading in response to its first quarter numbers. Pidilite stock gained after the company posted a strong first quarter performance that beat estimates. Net profit grew 19%, surpassing expectations, while revenue grew 11% compared to last year. Margins also improved, while volume growth for the June quarter stood at 9.9%, also beating estimates. India's largest depository, NSDL, made a healthy debut on BSE. The stock listed at a premium of 10% to its issue price and ended the day with another 7% gains. The listing gives NSDL a market cap of close to 20,000 crore rupees. The IPO, which was entirely an offer for sale, saw strong investor interest across categories, with the issue subscribed over 41 times. On that note, it is time for us to head into a short break. But coming up next, at least 5 people are dead and over 100 fear trapped under debris after flash floods triggered a landslide in Uttarakhand. More details on the other side. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're still with us on Business 360. Forces continue to bombard Gaza, killing at least 18 Palestinians since dawn. The military also attacked a United Nations clinic sheltering displaced people in the enclave. Meanwhile, Gaza's health ministry has reported that 5 people have died due to famine and malnutrition in the past 24 hours. Ukraine has said that Russia launched 45 drones across its cities, of which 9 hit 3 targets. Kiev also said that more than 330 Russian soldiers were killed in a failed attack on Ukraine's Sumy region. This comes as U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff visited Moscow ahead of President Trump's ultimatum for a ceasefire by Friday. The death toll in Uttarkashi has risen to 5 after a massive cloudburst triggered flash floods in the region. Rescue operations are underway and reports have suggested that 100 people are still stranded and 50 people are missing. State disaster management forces have rescued over 400 people so far. Chief Minister Pushkar Singh Dhami visited the site and inspected the ongoing rescue operations. CNN News 18's Anshul Singh joins us now with a ground report.
Weather has improved a lot over here. Rains have subsided over the last hour and a half, and sun has also come out for a few minutes as well. So rain has stopped, which means that the landslides that were prevalent in this entire area, they can take a break, and the landslides would not happen at least for the next few hours. And now the task at hand is to make sure that this entire national highway that connects Rishikesh to Uttarkashi is made motorable in some way or the other. How quickly can be done, that is the challenge in hand. But at this point in time, several such operations are underway that are being conducted on this entire national highway that connects Rishikesh to, in fact, Dharali, because this is the only road through which you can reach Dharali. And since this road is damaged in a very, very severe manner, it is almost impossible for any relief and rescue material to actually reach Dharali at this point in time. The only option left is through air, and that is something that is being done. SDRF teams have taken off from Dehradun and they are landing in Dharali very, very soon at this point. So definitely the work has started. The steady pace at which this entire rescue operation was going is still continuing.
So that's the latest on the Uttarakhand funds. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Narendra Modi inaugurated Kartavya Bhavan, the first building of the 10 upcoming Central Secretariat under the Central Vista project. This building will house the bureaucracy across ministries, including Home Affairs, External Affairs, Rural Development, among others. And with that, it is a wrap on this edition of Business 360. More news and updates continue right here on CNBC TV 18.